I don't want to have a war with Iraq because I don't think they deserve it, and it wasn't. I don't think they've got weapons of mass destruction. I think they're just doing it I think America are just doing it just because they want to be the most powerful country there is.
Then move!
I think this war is totally immoral and wrong, and it shouldn't be happening in the first place. I mean, I've looked at the situation and I think, well, you know, Saddam is torturing his people and something needs to be done about him. But sending hundreds of cruise missiles across and bombing his people into the sky is not the right answer.
There are also pretty terrifying regimes in many other places in the world which don't happen to have quite so much oil in them. And it's interesting that we're not busy going to war in these regimes.
It was on Wednesday, 19th of March. The school students from across Edinburgh and Lothians walked out of school and gathered on Parliament Square to protest against the war in Iraq.
There were easily 3,000 or 4,000 teenagers on that demo.
Our government is meant to represent us. They're doing something that we are totally against, and our voices must be heard.
It was certainly the largest mass demonstration of teenagers Edinburgh, and quite possibly Scotland, has ever seen.
The people are waking up all across the world in every country you can think of.
This war in Iraq is all over oil. It's not over anything legal.
You're not going to get away with it for very much longer.
The Wednesday walkout was organised by a group of young people that met together for the first time at a meeting organised by the Stop the War Coalition.
I think an important thing is to go there and see what's happening. I know
The fact that young people organised it, organised a route, organised where we were going to go, organised who was going to be there, was just immense.
Okay. Shut up.
The mood at our meeting was certainly optimistic, and in the end we decided to have a walkout from school on Wednesday, but the events of the next week took us all by surprise.
Well, if they want to sort out what's wrong with the world, they go to England and America and arrest Tony Blair and George Bush.
They locked all the gates at the top of the school. We tried to walk out, people were trying to climb over the railings and stuff.
Teachers physically stopping people from getting out of the school. They were blocking the gates and shouting at them, and they were also pushing them away from the gates and sending them back to class and threatening them with all sorts.
But we had an idea to go down and try and get out through the back entrance.
Whatever the length schools went to stop them leaving, hundreds of pupils from every high school in Edinburgh managed to get out of school.
Do you remember your clean underwear this morning?
They say they're trying to get rid of Saddam Hussein, but do you really need so many bombs and people and artillery just to get rid of one man?
Just to say, guys, it's proud that we're all here today. Even though people tried to stop us, we're still here. We want the war in Iraq stopped!
There was no other way really of getting our voice heard. Tried everything. A lot of people had sent letters to their local MP, their MSP. A lot of things were tried, but there just seemed to be no other way of getting your point forward than taking to the streets. We showed that we were bothered about this and we weren't just going to let it lie. You're not going to stop us unless you stop the war.
September the 11th is not justification for going to war. That was a terrorist act, and if George Bush feels he needs to to retaliate. He is no better than them.
People's lives are at stake, but generally people just don't care, and you want to like make them realise that people all over the world are just the same as you, and their lives have as much worth as yours does and stuff like that.
We thought that youth didn't have a lot of say, so we started up our own committee, and with more and more people come every single week, so it's like everyone gets a good choice and a say in what they think should happen.
If you want to be on our steering committee, then raise your hands right up.
We all got together and basically decided to form a group and take it further.
I think if we have a leaflet about Edinburgh youth, which is why we need to come up with what we are now and a resolution.
When we continued organising and building websites and that kind of thing, we came up with the name Edinburgh Youth.
Yeah, if you move it. I was just like a stereotypical teenager, like, you know, politics are boring sort of thing, and then I met a bunch of them at protest. And I was like, oh, so right, something is happening then, and got involved. You're with people who are all your own age, but still have the same sort of motivation as you. People from different backgrounds who are different schools and have different life experiences, but you're all like together for the same thing.
We've got so many different mixtures of people, and Edinburgh Youth brings out like the highlights of everybody, which I find that's what I like most about it.
It doesn't matter what school you're from, what music you listen to, how you dress. What matters is that you all know that this war is wrong.
The hatred which America is encouraging in the Arab world will not run out, unlike the oil. So think about it. In the long run, what is better, having a few more gallons of oil, or the Arab nations on peaceful terms with the Western world?
I just couldn't believe it. There were so many people just flooding towards us. I was like, you know, this is amazing.
The comedian from Channel 4, Mark Thomas, did a stunt, a die-in in fact, which was everybody on Princes Street, when the 1 o'clock gun went off, had to just fall on the ground and just die.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Knowing that thousands of people your age agree with you on something like that is a really sort of empowering, confidence-boosting feeling. It brought so many young people together and gave them the chance to make their voices heard.
Young people of Edinburgh, I'm so proud of you all, and you're all amazing!
The whole talk that, in particular, the Scottish Socialist Party were trying to con us into taking time off school to support their cause. But, I mean, there was really no foundations for that. In my opinion, Edinburgh Youth was merely facilitated by the Scottish Socialist Party. We were there, we had our views. The fact that so many people could go up and articulate themselves so well showed there was nothing about being led astray and being manipulated, because we weren't getting fed our lines by the SSP and by others. That was generally what we thought.
This is our world. It made me feel very proud. I was very proud that I could have had the opportunity to stand up and speak to so many people and in a small way just influence what they thought.
Let us remember that many people may build a protest, but many voices will stop this war.
Thank you, Elsa.
And actually I think we learned a lot more going on the demonstrations about what was happening in the whole world rather than what was happening in a little textbook.
Now, I know that we're not the scum of the school, as the Evening News so kindly put us this week, so I invite anyone who thinks we are the scum of the school to come to our meetings and find out for real.
They were saying that Iraqi oil will only last for 20 years. So you could say, if even if this war is for oil, well, there's going to be an awful lot of bloodshed for a very short-term solution to general problems.
You could argue that it's basically so that America doesn't have to sign agreements to cut down on fossil fuel consumption.
It's something like America expect over the course of the war to spend $200 billion on the war.
Does anyone know what their health and education budgets are?
It's okay. 900 billion is how much they'll get from oil revenue.
There's an incredible rise in knowledge about politics in schools now. And I think there's a lot of people that during the war in Iraq that questioned the government's judgment about going into war and are now a lot more politically aware than they used to be, and I think that's fantastic.
The hours ahead of conflict, young and old across the country joined to condemn war against Iraq.
Well, the media coverage was absolutely atrocious. They casted it off as people's excuse for a skive, but if they'd actually been there, then they would know that the people that were just there for a skive, the small minority that were there for a skive, actually left really early, and there were still loads and thousands of people there that were actually cared about what we were doing, and we do have a view on this, and I thought the media didn't portray that at all.
Further angry protests against conflict, including a schools demo earlier today in Edinburgh's Princes Street. Well, let's go there now.
They were handing over to their political correspondent in Edinburgh, and they essentially just said that Tommy Sheridan organised this protest and was the Pied Piper of Hamelin and led thousands of school pupils out onto the streets. And I guess that kind of summed it up, that the media was very unwilling to listen to us or accept the fact that we organised it and that was a possibility.
Brian, not to disregard anyone's opinion, but I presume the children didn't organise and mobilise this demonstration themselves.
No, they didn't, and that's causing controversy tonight because others are saying that it was orchestrated by the Scottish Socialist Party.
I think that's the fear factor, that's the attack through fear. The only way for the government to shut you up is to try and get people to turn against you. So that's to align you with unsavoury people like the SSP, or to kind of say that you're troublemakers, or you don't know what you're talking about, or you're recruiting from school. I think the attacks, again, I'll just go back to saying the more they attack you, the more frightened they are. So keep frightening them.
They weren't at all interested in what we had to say, unless it was what would fit their article. Getting a story that made us out to be kind of these nice middle-class kids that have gone off the rails and are doing all these ridiculous things, and it's just sort of teenage rebellion. It's not about anything actually important to us.
I think that just because we're children, right, doesn't mean that we don't know anything about our subject and we can't form our own opinions. My opinion is this war is an absolute disgrace, and that was the same with the other 3,000 kids that walked out.
We were protesting to show our disappointment and our shame in a government that had launched a war in Iraq that the people had never supported.
So, I'm looking forward to seeing everybody up in the Parliament. Well done!
After the dying in Princes Street, the protest moved to the Parliament. While people don't care and people think, I'm just one person, what can I do? The governments of the world can get away with anything. But as soon as people are watching them, people are noticing what they're doing, they've got to be a lot more careful.
Presiding Officer, these are deeply worrying times.
They are, First Minister, they are. Jack McConnell stressed Scotland was ready for war or terrorism.
There's all the big stories about why did the Cabinet all support the war, and I believe that it was because they didn't want to risk their jobs.
This war isn't in the name of Britain. It's in the name of Tony Blair and George Bush. Just because, a very small minority of people want this to happen doesn't mean that it should.
That's not what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like.
The people of this country elected the politicians to high positions so they could represent us, and right now they're not really doing that. They're voting for themselves and not for the people.
This is what democracy looks like. That is not democracy.
one of the kind of issues is that, so we have all this money to spend on invading another country, but we don't have it to spend on education or health or benefits for young people. We've had years of education cuts, there's nowhere for young people. The politicians don't seem to care about us.
This is military action against the evil regime of Saddam Hussein.
What the anti-war movement was fundamentally about was getting ordinary people involved and providing an alternative to the government's propaganda, telling people what was really going on.
No, we want America.
But they keep going on about it's about weapons of mass destruction. America has more military strength than the next 27 countries put together. So absolutely ridiculous.
We're still confident that we will find weapons of mass destruction because they're there. We have known for years that those weapons exist.
American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
The governments tried and failed to get UN support. They provided evidence of Iraq's huge weapons of mass destruction programs, and then they decided that support from the public and the international community wasn't all that important anyway. Ignoring everyone, George W. Bush and Tony Blair officially attacked Iraq.
US-led operations against Iraq begin. Explosions and anti-aircraft fire over Iraq.
And when war broke out that night, I thought I was gutted, and you know, there aren't words to describe the feelings I was feeling. You know, it was a sort of disbelief.
If it is true that war has actually started, it's possible that Iraqi civilians are actually on the receiving end of that now. People are facing the prospect of being killed and maimed in an illegal, immoral, illogical war.
The Pentagon says cruise missiles have been launched against targets of opportunity. The hostilities have begun, the bombers are in the air.
But not my name on this Jacob's ladder. The only way up is down. One step from disaster, two to make the higher ground. Jacob's ladder.
Our opinions don't seem to count for very much in this country because Tony Blair runs around after Bush and ignores the great majority of people here.
9/11 got branded, 9/11 got sold. There'll be no one left to water all the seeds you sow. On this Jacob's ladder, the only way up is down.
Keep your heads high and say loud and clear to those young men and women in Iraq who have committed no crime. This war is not in our name. Thanks very much.
The first 3 days of the war, there were $3 billion American dollars spent on ammunition, on cruise missiles, on missiles and airstrikes. They were bombing the hell out of Baghdad. They still are.
I mean, did anybody else see the headline on the paper the day that war started? It said something like, "Show them no mercy, they have stains on their souls," which equated every Iraqi to the level of Saddam Hussein, which was just absolutely filthy.
I think the admirable thing was that we all stood up after that and still continued to protest. And if you're showing us pictures from Iraq with people knocking down statues or whatever, it's still wrong.
On the Saturday after that, there was a huge protest marching along Princes Street, and it was massive.
There was people from all over Scotland that came down to Edinburgh to demonstrate. The police were trying to guide the march where they wanted it to go. The marchers decided to try and break free from the
police guidance. And there was people breaking in all over the place of all ages, and people were knocking down the barriers and stuff and trying to make their own way up to the medals.
Alright, guys! Shut up!
I think it's everyone's personal decision.
Chair.
I think we might be scared here.
I think one of the issues we probably should discuss is how militant basically we're willing to be and the other types of action we can take, which I think we should definitely keep peaceful, but not necessarily within the rather constraining arm of the law.
On the topic of civil disobedience, there was no other way really of getting our voice heard.
Guys, what we're trying to do is we're trying to peacefully protest, we're trying to come civil disobedience, that's what it's about. It's not about spray painting bushes a wanker on the road or something.
The Monday before the big scheduled Wednesday walkout, we decided that it would be a good idea to storm the castle, mainly because the castle was a landmark in Edinburgh and that it would attract a great deal of media attention. It's vitally important that you attract attention during demonstrations, because if you follow the complete legal route of demonstrating, then you don't make headline news 9 times out of 10. Gandhi as well used civil disobedience, and he rose up against the British Empire with great success.
I think in a lot of ways the protesters have managed to subvert the fact that their actions are being termed illegal and turning that on its head and saying, well, no, what I'm doing is legal because what I'm protesting against is so much more illegal.
Bombing of the Iraqi front line intensified. Position after position smashed. The accuracy was remarkable.
This illegal war, supposed to be consisting of surgical strikes to remove the head of the Iraqi people, the regime. But if it's surgical strikes, then why are the Iraqi hospitals filled in Baghdad with people, children, whose heads have been pierced with the shrapnel metal that explodes from cruise missiles and the stealth bombers, which the Americans think are a stroke of genius?
There's hundreds, maybe even 1,000 or so police there at the protests, with horses, bikes, vans, everything. There's no need in it all.
We're not going to be able to take on the police force of Great Britain. They were threatening us with arrest if you guys stayed sitting, and then they were threatening the rest of you with arrest.
The police were really stirring up trouble. They had been so aggressive to people, like pushing us back into the crowd. And I mean, there was kids there, and I think the adults, they got sort of shoved onto the street, really aggressive shove. They were like, kids, yeah, get off the street, like you're just there for the violence. And so they made us out to be really bad, and then the media thought we were really bad, so we got like the majority of people thinking that we were bad. We all stayed involved in the movement. We went to a Globalised Resistance conference in Glasgow. We all went to London to protest against the occupation. And we went to Fastlane to protest against the Trident weapons. It was a blockade of the Trident nuclear submarine base.
I think sort of for us as a group, going to Fastlane was very important and very closely connected to what we'd been doing protesting against the war.
What the point is to block the gates going into the base to stop the workers getting in, to shut down the base for a day. And about 4 of us who got arrested.
I didn't want to get arrested, so I didn't lock myself on.
and I decided that I would go around and feed people chocolate, the people that were locked on, and apparently that's a breach of the peace, so I got arrested. I think that it's important that if people are they're yelling overseas at other countries for having weapons of mass destruction, and yet they have some parked in their own country and they just ignore it, you've got to point out their hypocrisy and that it's dangerous to have something in a country like that, and we're against the general principle of it.
Over the past 10-20 years, particularly since Margaret Thatcher was in power, people have become less and less politically involved. I think with the miners' strikes and those being kind of crushed, then people have started to think that they can't be involved and they can't make a difference, and this has really changed that. It's made politics matter.
I think it was worth doing because I actually got up and did something about what was going on in the world and not just watched it happen. It really did show that the young people are politically minded, and it opened up this whole debate within young people about politics.
It's changed the whole attitude among politicians and teachers, etc. Because for years they've been going on about how apolitical we are and apathetic and we don't care about anything, and how can we make the young people care about stuff. And when you've got 14-year-olds demanding from their teachers to learn more about the political system, that's a pretty significant change in itself.
If I see something like this happening again anywhere in the world, then I would feel that it would be my duty, not just my right, to stand up and say something about it.
We did make lots of people aware. First off, that the government needs to justify itself to the people. Now it's coming out slowly but surely that the government used false documents and the people that entrusted in the government what information they were telling them to be true, and now it's coming out that it just plainly wasn't true.
If you look back on the war now, there's the big argument about weapons of mass destruction. None have been found. That was one of the main arguments for the war. 45-minute claim turned out to be a load of crap, and it bemuses me that Tony Blair can still sit there and say we were right.
People are more aware of the propaganda and are more aware of the alternatives to what's going on at the moment. I mean, you can see that with the Green and Socialist MSPs that were voted in the last Scottish election.
So I feel proud in a way that I didn't trust the government first time round and didn't just agree with them wholeheartedly because they were my government. I didn't vote them in, and I still don't trust them.
The youth aren't apathetic. The fact that they've lost all faith in the political system means that when they do have something to care about, they're going to do something about it. And that's quite a dangerous thing for the politicians, that they don't want young people that care about stuff enough to go out on the streets and start screaming about it. A lot of people that were criticising us are now going, oh wait, okay, these kids actually knew more about it than we did. They were right all along.